Every 4 years, the citizens of our country head to the polls to elect our nation's leader. Just in our generation alone, candidates have emerged with various backgrounds, ideas, and policies. But they all have one thing in common: promises. Eliminate the debt, secure our border, boost the economy, fix education, protect Medicaid, lower taxes, cut spending, reduce government, increase jobs, restore values, and make America great again. And now we are faced with a decision between left and right, liberal and conservative, Democrat and Republican. So we attend the rallies, write the checks, hear the debates, analyze the polls, listen to the spin, watch the ads, follow the campaigns, pick a candidate, go to the polls, cast our votes, and then we wait. But what if this time something changed?
Well, good morning. Good morning, Delania. You look great. All those in Cleveland, thank you for being here and joining us there. And those who are watching us online for the few minutes that I have you. Because if you just watch that bumper video and you see, oh my goodness, we are in church and they're going to talk about politics, don't tune me out too quickly, okay? Don't tune me out too quickly. I know, boo, hiss, right? But here's the thing, I can't go anywhere without somebody, and I don't know if there's just a target on my back, something on my forehead where people start to bring this up. I'm at the gym, and there's a few guys there, some that I've been going there for years and seeing the same people, and you never talk, and suddenly they want to strike up a conversation, and they just introduce themselves by bringing up politics. And I'm like, wow, I have lived in our house for, 17 years. I have never had anyone knock on my door to talk about, who I'm going to vote for, but it happened this week. And I'm like, and so can I just say, I'm going to step into the awkward. For the next few weeks, we're going to talk about this, hopefully in a way that brings us together, not drives us apart. But we have to talk about it because, after all, you've heard them tell us, this is the most important election of our lifetime, right? And we've heard that so many times. I have heard that over and over and over. It's the most important election of our lifetime. And maybe it is. I'm not saying it's not. Maybe it is. But I'm just wondering if that is like hyperbole, that is just an exaggeration, right? A scare tactic to get us to vote, and to get us to vote a certain way. Not just to vote, but to vote a certain way. Or is it reality that there's something so consequential that if we don't do something this time, we'll not have a chance to do it ever again, like ever again. Now, I understand there are some important issues that affect all of us. And so even if you don't participate, they still affect you, right? A lot's at stake. There's stuff about economy, right? And I don't mean just like global economy and world economy. We're talking about home, personal, family economy. There's things about security, and we're talking about national security, but local security, and even in your neighborhood security. Of course, there's all of the talk about liberty and the loss of liberty or the expansion of liberty, right? There's sovereignty, Are we going to be able to be a nation that stands alone and self-sufficient? Or, are we going to have to play footsie with other people that maybe don't have our best interest at heart, right? But then there's even questions for us, those of us, who are here today or watching online and we're people of faith. There's questions of morality, what's right, what's wrong, right? What does God allow and disallow? And then there's just, like, for all of us, there's a lot at stake when it just comes to human decency. Like, how do we behave and conduct ourselves with one another? And what do we expect of our leaders who represent us and do business with other people around the world, right? So here's the thing. It's all, and I know you know this, it's all being fear-driven. Because, listen, with fear, you get people afraid, you can get them to do something. If you can get people afraid, you can raise a lot of money, right? And so that's why you don't hear so many hopeful messages, but you hear fear-driven messages. And this is what's so troubling. It's all driven by fear, and we can't even talk about it with each other. Political discussions are off limits because I know people, maybe you know people, maybe you are experiencing not only the division in the country, but division in your family. I spoke with someone who said they normally have, their adult kids and different ones all gather at their house for Thanksgiving, and they all do that. But this year they're not. Him and his wife are just going to go on vacation somewhere, and they're not getting everybody together because their kids all vote differently than one another, and they don't even want to get together at Thanksgiving because someone will have lost and somebody else would have won. So a family is reorganizing their family gathering traditions. They can't even be together because of politics. Some of you may have lost friends. I've heard of someone who no longer has a relationship with their neighbor because their neighbor stuck a sign in the yard for an opposing party. And it ended a relationship. And I'm like, really? And so I know we want to come to church and sometimes we want to check out from that conversation. But really, what I'm hoping to do is that maybe we have a different kind of conversation. But here's the thing, if the election is so consequential, if this is the election of our lifetime and it is so consequential, don't you wish we had better candidates? Okay, and Cleveland, I don't know if that got a laugh, but over here it got audible, okay? Because that's where I am. If the election is so consequential and there's so much at stake, I just wish we had better candidates, and I definitely wish we had better conversations, right? And so the reason I'm bringing this up is because Jesus gave us a better way to be politically engaged. He wasn't passive, right? He never expected his followers to be passive, but he gave us a better way. Now, when Jesus was around, you say, yeah, but it was much different then. No, it wasn't. It was just as politically divided and religiously divided then as it was now. And can I tell you, it was much more violent over these issues. And here's the thing, they had the same issues then that we're talking about now. Economy, taxation, liberty, the expansion of it or the withdrawal of it, right? Sovereignty and national sovereignty, national security, morality. And listen, when we think we have something at stake, all the groups back then had a more passionate sense of eternity. Because they all felt that what was being decided would have eternal implications. We've lost that. You see, there was political groups surrounding Jesus and his first followers and when he was starting his ministry, he was in this pool of political debate among political groups that were all pushing their agendas and they all had their ideologies and they were all trying to shape culture and they were all vying for power and they were all trying to influence people. And it was just as consequential then as it is now. And as I said, even more violent then than it is now. So what I want us to do today is just kind of lay some groundwork. It's going to be a little history lesson, okay? To kind of give you some insights of the political groups that Jesus had to contend with. The first group is probably the most, known for those who may have ever been to church, read a Bible or anything, or just had these, any conversations about Jesus or heard stories about Jesus. It's the Pharisees. And if I was going to tell you a little about the Pharisees' platform, here's what it would look like. First of all, the name Pharisee. You say, what does that mean? If you translate that Hebrew word out, it means set apart, and that tells you everything. We are set apart. We're not like everybody else, right? They were the traditionalists. This would be their platform. Hold on to those rich traditions. They were legalists, very strict interpretations of the law according to their interpretations. They were moralists. And so this wasn't just it might be good for you and not necessarily good for you. No. There were definite right and wrongs, right? God was going to judge based on what they did and what we as a society did. They believed in a localized government. Localized government. In other words, it wasn't centralized around the temple and around a certain group. While they were in authorities, they set up synagogues. They set up these what we would consider houses of worship, but they were really places of prayer, but also political debate. And they would set these up all over the place. And so you would have leaders when each local community and synagogues within the community that would influence the local community, they would get together, kind of like we do in our country, right? And they would get together and decide some stuff nationally, but for the most part, it was localized government and influence and control. And they were all about restoring Israel to its former glory, to going back to the good old days with those traditional values, right? Now, in the establishment of the local synagogue, they kind of controlled people's day-to-day behaviors because they were out there in the grassroots among the people, right? So think of Think of this as like the state capitals. They were the governors who ran the state capitals. And they demanded accountability for the kings and the priests. The kings and the priests and those people who were up there and, in Jerusalem, they need to be accountable to the law. So they were constantly having skirmishes and debates and arguments against those power brokers and trying to throw the scriptures at them and hold them accountable to God's law. This would be comparable to like the religious conservative groups of our day. The moral majority, where they come in, and this isn't just a matter of good policy, this is a matter of righteousness and holiness, and we should be distinct and set apart, not like the rest of the world, right? And so they try to influence government through like churches and religious institutions, but especially also through educational institutions by starting up, Christian schools and private schools and all of those things. And again, I'm not saying that's wrong. I'm not giving you a judgment. I'm just giving you a description, right? But here's the thing. In their sincere devotion to God and to being right and doing everything right, they were also known for being incredibly judgmental towards people and withholding any kind of grace for those who fell short. Well, then the next group's the Sadducees. And let me just say, between these two, this would almost be like the two major parties in our system today, right? The conservatives, a little bit of the liberals, right? But in this sense, you would think, well, the Pharisees were the conservatives. No, compared to the Sadducees, they were the liberals. Because the Sadducees, they were even more strict. But here's the thing about the Sadducees. They were generally from the well-educated, very wealthy, priestly upper class. These were the elitist. In fact, the word Sadducee translates to correct ones. We're not just separate, we're right. That's what their name says, we're right. And they were the elitist, the wealthy, the educated, the creme de la creme, right? Listen, they would collaborate though. Like Roman Empire had taken over this region, and so they would collaborate with the Roman Empire because the Roman Empire had all of the power, and the Sadducees wanted power. So in order to get offices and to stay in office, they had to work with the Roman authorities to do that. So they collaborated to keep their positions of power. Now, they were all about centralized government. Everything comes out of Jerusalem. And everything comes out of the temple. You know why? Because they controlled the temple. They're the ones who controlled how the worship was to take place, who got access and who didn't. They were the ones, it was their party who had the high priest, the one in charge of all of it and all the priestly group. And they held more seats kind of on their Congress, the Sanhedrin. The Sadducees always had more representatives on the Sanhedrin, right? They're kind of Congress making the laws, right? These were the guys who occupied Washington, D.C., right? It would be comparable to the establishment that we hear, right? This is the swamp that some have wanted to drain right here. This is it. Career politicians, right? And the thing is, they always would just want to maintain the status quo. They would talk about change and reform, but they would never really do that because revolution meant destruction as long as Rome was watching over you. And so they would never really change anything. They would talk about things that needed to be changed. What they really did was they practiced cooperation and collaboration, which led to corruption. Because Jesus would talk about how corrupt this group was. And then you get this next group, the Zealots. The Zealots were the extremists, right? They were all about national sovereignty and independence. They wanted to overthrow the Roman Empire and establish a Jewish state, even if it meant doing it through revolt and violence if necessary. These are the ones who stormed the Capitol. These are the ones who have the violent protest in the streets. These are the ones who would destroy their own city to make a point, right? They were all about military strength, and they demanded the right to bear arms, not just for their own physical protection, but in case you ever had to have a revolution. So when Rome said you can't have swords over a certain size, these are the ones you go to their house because they had them, and they hid them, and they used them. So they would be comparable to like the nationalist movements or the revolutionaries, right? Or those who would just do violent protests in our own cities and communities, the terrorists or even the would-be assassins who try to get their point across in that way. They would fight for freedom, but here's the thing. They were all about deporting the foreigners, meaning all of the Romans, and by the way, all those other ones, whether it was the Samaritans or any of the other sellouts, let's just push them out and establish our own secure borders, right? But here's the thing. If we collaborate, if we have representatives who go up there and into Jerusalem and they try to work out a deal, collaboration was capitulation. If you cooperate, you're giving in. If in any way you somehow come up with a compromise, that's conceding, so we're not doing it. And so these guys worked behind the scene to create all types of fear and terror and created gridlock for everything. So they would fight hard for freedom, but it would end up only costing everybody a greater loss of freedom, as Rome and even some of their own people would clamp down on them. Then you get to this next group, the Hellenists. The Hellenists, it's really about the Greek culture. That's where that name even comes from. These were the progressives, forward thinking. They were all about cultural integration, and you've got all this diversity of culture, and let's just kind of all learn from each other and exchange each other's ideas and exchange each other's values, right? They were for peaceful coexistence. They weren't trying to impose, one way upon anyone. All about inclusion and all about tolerance. They adopted the Greek culture, the Greek language, and now remember, these are Jewish people. These are all Jewish people with a unique culture, and they're saying, no, let's take the Greek language as ours. Let's take the Greek philosophy and education, their worldview, even their practices. And what that did was that put them in a culture war with the others, right? All the traditional Jews and even those who, like the Zealots who were fighting, they were really hostile towards the Hellenists because this is our own people selling out. Right? Within this group, you would have a group called the Herodians, King Herod, if you know the story of Jesus' birth and King Herod. Or, later his son, around the execution of Jesus, he went before his son Herod. These were the kings, but they weren't really Jewish people. These were guys who converted Judaism only so that they could be appointed by Rome as a client king. So they were king in name only, a little bit of power, but, they served under Rome. Well, that's because they played footsie with Rome. They took Roman culture and Roman ideas and Roman language and Roman customs and all of that. And so that's how they got positioned, by just blending together. Even though they were professing to be Jews, they were non-practicing Jews. So this would be comparable to those cultural and political progressives that we have that profess some type of faith, but yet they've redefined faith and redefine the teachings of their faith to take on practices that their faith would never embrace, right? And they actually reject the people of their faith who hold to the traditional practices, right? And so here's the thing. What ended up happening with this group was they just ended up normalizing immorality. Immorality according to their own faith, and immorality according to previous generations, and even sometimes immorality just among the population. Then you get the Essenes. This group is the isolationists. They were very much about anti-corruption, fighting the corruption. And here's the thing, if we can't resist it, then we will flee from it and avoid it and not participate. These are the ones that when elections came, we're not voting. We don't care. We're checking out. We're done. Instead, what we're going to do is we're heading off to the desert, and we're creating our own closed community with the HOA, and then we can decide who comes in and what rules you live by, right? And so these were communities in the desert that were pursuing purity. And they were preserving the scriptures, right? Because in some cases, Rome and others are trying to destroy the scriptures, the Jewish scriptures, because there's so much in there about how you should do your politics and your government and your morality. And so they were trying to preserve all of that. And so here they were isolating and they were praying and they were just waiting for God to intervene. But they had stopped trying to intervene themselves, right? They're just not going to participate. So this is like those political isolationists, right? The separatist groups. Maybe even the survivalist groups, the doomsday preppers who've got a stash somewhere and they're just waiting for society to collapse. So all about cultural preservation. Autarky. Some of you go, I don't even know what that is, right? I know, I learned this word too. I didn't know there was a word for this. This is whenever you believe that the government system or the nation should be completely and entirely self-sustaining. That we produce our own oil, our own energy, our own economy, our own products, our own steel, and everything else, and we don't need to do trade with anyone else. If we do, it is always for our benefit. But the truth is, we don't need you. We got it. And it's a closed society. Again, it's kind of like those doomsday preppers that we see. Maybe some of you are that way. I get it. This would relate to some of the groups that we have today who say when it comes to politics, I don't care. I just take care of me and mine. And so they're totally disengaged from the world. But here's the other thing. They're also disengaged from God's activity in the world. And then the last group is the Romans. It's the Romans. I mean, this is the dominant power. This is the empire that is ruling the region and a lot of the, civilized world at this point. And they're expansionist. And they want to take their Roman principles and their Roman rule and they want to keep pushing the borders until they have it all around the world, right? They want to take their ideas and their ideologies and drive it into all these other areas. They're about global dominance, military supremacy, not security, supremacy. There will be no one stronger, no one mightier. They're all about economic prosperity through taxation, usually, right? Through international and global trade that benefits them. Of course, they were about cultural diversity. They didn't expect everybody to look, smell, act, and talk like a Roman. They would let you be what you are, and you were fine as long as you pledged your allegiance and loyalty to Rome. Worship who you want to worship. Dress how you want to dress. You do what you want to do as long as your loyalty remains to Rome. And it was all about imperial allegiance. Imperial allegiance to the point that it developed into a cult-like religion with a divine mandate. They would tell you how Rome started, and it all started with the gods. And then they would elevate their leaders and their Caesars to the point of deifying them, or at least saying if Caesar's not God, he is at least God's representative. God's man, God's woman. And that's the language that they would use. And it was about, listen, it wasn't just patriotism, proud to be Roman. It was nationalism of we are right and everyone else is wrong. And therefore, we're the only ones who have the right to rule the world. And so Rome's influence and their control was so great, it was overwhelming and seemingly insurmountable. So, that's your group. There's your ballot. Here's the question. If you were living back then, who reflects you? And who would you choose? Because that's your ballot. When Jesus comes up on the scene, he is talking to people and calling people to follow him who are represented by this group. And within his own followers, including the 12, he has a zealot. He has a Hellenist. He has a tax collector who is playing footsie with Rome to get rich and powerful positions. His name is Matthew. He wrote the first gospel in the New Testament. He's got a zealot named Simon. And in fact, at some point, Jesus said, hey, it's going to get sticky, and I hope you have something to protect yourself. You need a sword. And they're quickly going, got one right here. Got it. Packing, loaded, ready to go. Got a stash, right? Here's the other thing. His cousin, John the Baptist, was from the Essenes, out in the wilderness, the isolationist, who didn't even eat the regular food everybody ate, right? Locusts and honey, which, by the way, was not a bug. It's a plant called a locust plant. Either way, he was breaking from society and came from the wilderness as one crying out like a madman, like a doomsday prepper. You see, Jesus had people from all of these groups. He talked to the Pharisees. He sat down with Nicodemus at night, a Pharisee, and had this conversation. And then later, after, his death and resurrection, he taps on the shoulder a man by the name of Saul. Paul, Saul is Hebrew name, Paul is Greek name, who was a Pharisee. And he said he's the Pharisee of all Pharisees. Like he was like the rising star in the class. Jesus engaged this. He went to a Roman and healed a Roman's servant. He crossed all of these lines. So the question is, when I go through this and describing, because I can see the look on some of your faces here in Dahlonega, and I can almost see through the screen in Cleveland, I know too. Some of you, as I'm describing these, are going, where's he going with this? Because he's trying to connect this with my group. So my question is, who reflects you? Because not much has changed, has it? And who would you choose? Because here's the thing, each one of them claimed to offer the best way forward for society. They all had a platform. And each one claimed to be the best representation of God, including the Romans. And they all claimed to have the moral high ground. That it was those other groups who had it so wrong. You see, each one of them claimed to be faithful. But the truth is, every one of them were fearful. Every one of them, including the powerhouse Rome, was scared to death of losing control and losing power. But every one of them used language of faith and moral superiority. So maybe if we had to vote, you would choose none of the above. I want to check out, but I can't check out. I want to be the Essenes and go off and live in the desert, but I don't like eating locusts, right? And I like clothes, right? And I like having friends, right? And so maybe I don't know where I'm supposed to be, and I can't just check out because it all affects me. So I can't not participate and sit on the sidelines because, well, then what's going to happen? And so maybe like me, many of us here, many of us watching feel like during the elections, we're choosing the lesser of two evils. That we just don't have a good option. And what do you choose? What do you do when you're having to choose between the lesser of evils? Now, this goes all the way back to Aristotle, the Greek philosopher way back there. And here's what he said. For the lesser of evil can be seen in comparison with the greater evil as a good. Since the lesser evil is preferable to the greater one, and what's preferable is good. So I've got these two choices, and they kind of both stink in different ways. You know, and I just have to figure out which one's going to do the less damage and which one's going to be the lesser evil and which one is not as bad as the other one and which one is what. And so it's a race to the bottom so that then I can pick the one who comes in second, right? But here's the thing. Here's what I'm seeing in our politics. When forced to choose between bad options, don't mistake or debate the lesser or better as being good. Here's what I'm trying to say. When you don't have good options and you say, well, they're going to be at least not as damaging as the other, don't now start arguing like it's good. It's not. And that's what I'm seeing is we're left with not really good options in a lot of areas, not just in politics, in your own personal life. And because you kind of figured out this one's not quite as bad as the other, you don't have to spin it to everybody else like it's good. It is still a bad option. But here's the problem. It's not just with candidates, it's with all of our lives. If we keep making the bad choices we're making, eventually you get to a place where there are no good options. And then when you try to find the one you can live with, you spin it to everybody else as if it's a good option. It's not. It's just the one you have to live with, right? So given the candidates, there's a lot of people, and I understand, there's a lot of people who are just considering not voting. Or at least skipping the top of the ticket and going on down a little. And that's understandable. But for some of us, it feels irresponsible. In fact, it feels un-American. And it makes us upset. So let me just give you a disclaimer for today and the next couple of days, a couple of weeks. I am not telling you not to vote. However, I am going to ask some of you to change parties. Just hold on. Don't throw nothing yet. Maybe several of us. Maybe more of us than I've even imagined. I am going to ask us to change parties. Because you see, Jesus offers an option to those who are weary from choosing the lesser of evils. Amen. And that's in every area of your life, but especially in our politics. In Matthew's gospel, it says that there's a point where Jesus is walking with the disciples, and he takes them out of a way, and he takes them to a place where good Jewish boys and girls should never go. He takes them to a city of Caesarea Philippi. It says, when Jesus came to the region of Caesarea Philippi, he asked his disciples, who do people say the Son of Man is? Now, let me tell you a little bit about Caesarea Philippi. Caesarea Philippi it was built by Herod the Great, who did a lot of buildings and, a lot of stuff there in the Middle East. Just a great architect and builder, and just phenomenal what he accomplished as far as architecturally. So he built this city. It was renamed by his son, Philip, and it was named in honor of Caesar Augustus and himself. That's why it's Caesarea Philippi. Now, this became kind of a regional capital, especially under Philip. And so it was like a royal resort, but it also had like administrative buildings, and he would go there for long periods of time, and he could rule that region kind of as the client king under Rome. He could rule that region from Caesarea Philippi. So it had, one of the things his dad built there was a temple to Caesar, where you could go in and actually worship and pay tribute to the Roman Caesar. And that's what I meant, nationalism, not just patriotism, right? It was extreme. But they also had all these other temples and all these other places of worship because it was diverse. And so, if there was a God out there, let's build something to them. This is kind of the all-skate, everybody's in. It was a shopping mall of religion. It was a cross between maybe Mardi Gras and New Orleans with what went on, and Washington, D.C., with the buildings that all represented something and meant something. And they were part temples and part administration and part government. And so when you went there, it was deeply, deeply Roman. And yet this diversity of all of these thoughts and ideologies all brought together under and around a shrine to Caesar, a shrine to Rome. Very much like if Jesus had walked into Washington, D.C., and stood in our capital, which, by the way, has the subtitle name Temple of Liberty, Temple of Democracy, which is built, by the way, in a Greek architectural temple style with a rotunda that reflects the Roman pantheon of gods, which when you walk into the rotunda has statues all the way around of people that we've almost deified in our story. It'd be really similar to that. And when he gets there, he asked the question, who do people say the Son of Man is? Now, the Son of Man comes from a Jewish prophet, Daniel, way back in history. And Daniel, whenever there was a lot of political turmoil and stuff going on between nations, and he has this vision, this dream, this weird thing, and he sees 4 beasts coming up out of the ocean. And each of these 4 beasts represents powerful, violent, prideful kings and empires. But then he sees one who comes up and he describes it like the Son of Man, which is a strange way of saying, but it was a human being. But he came up and it was more than a human being, but he was a human being. It's like the perfect human being. And he came up and he overcame the beast. He triumphed over them even while they were striking him. And then the Son of Man rides a cloud to the presence of God and sits on a throne and forever rules the world. And so, Jesus walks down the mall in Washington, D.C., all the way to the steps of the Capitol and the Rotunda and said, so who do people say is going to save the world? Now, we automatically think he's asking them about himself, because he would use this phrase, Son of Man, later to talk about himself. But this is the first time he uses this phrase. He says, who do they say is going to save the world? Who's the politician of the day that's going to fix it? When Daniel was talking about the one who's going to sit next to God and rule over, who is that? And they go on and say, they replied, some say it's John the Baptist. John the Baptist who's been executed, he's probably the guy, because, this raging madman from the wilderness who isolated and retained the scriptures. And I mean, he was about purity and righteousness and he stood in the face of kings even when it cost him his life. And he spoke truth to power. Some say it's going to be him. He's going to be the one that God's going to raise up and he's going to rule the world. Others said it was Elijah. You know, Elijah, this great prophet, because he did that. Boy, he stuck his finger in the face of some kings that were immoral and he called them out. And he didn't even die. The story is that a chariot of fire just swept him away. So he didn't die. So he already rode up on the clouds to God, and he's sitting on the throne. Others say it was Jeremiah, another one who suffered greatly for crying out for God. And then some others say maybe one of the other prophets. I don't know, maybe Moses. He was great. He did some awesome stuff, right? But then Jesus says, but what about you? Who do you say that I am? And note where he's standing. On the temple steps, right? Surrounded at that point by the seat of Rome. But what about you? Who do you say I am? Where do I fit in all of this political stuff? Simon Peter said, you are the Messiah, which means the anointed one, the chosen one, the long-awaited one. And they had a lot of baggage that they associated with that because you're the one who's going to ride in on the horse and lead the armies and rid us of Rome. You're the one who's going to put those religious people in place. You're the one who's going to come and fight our battles. You're going to overthrow all military might. You're going to reestablish the economy. I mean, you're not just a candidate we vote on. You're the one that God has already ordained, the Son of the living God, surrounded by all these statues of dead gods and dead guys. You're the one. And then Jesus replied, blessed are you, Simon, son of Jonah, for this was not revealed, okay? I love it. He said, because you ain't that bright, boy. That's what he's saying. Blessed are you, John, because you're not that smart. Flesh and blood did not reveal this to you. My Father in heaven has opened up your eyes, opened up your heart, and granted you the grace and the capacity to see what's really going on. And he says, and I tell you that you are Peter, which was not a name back then. It's an object, a rock, right? And so I'm now going to call you Rocky. And on this rock, this bedrock, this foundation, Peter, this is a rock, like you're a stone, you're a pebble, but on this bedrock foundation, two different words, I will build my church, and the gates of Hades will not overcome it. Now, when this is translated church, and it's so common to us, the word church does not actually appear in the Bible, in the Greek or the Hebrew, in either form. This comes from a much later language, and that word that we see church, that is used as a translation, literally means house of God, and it's not even a capital G. It just means a house or a place of God or gods. And so it's a really bad translation. In fact, the first English translations didn't use the word church. They used like the congregation, right? Because the word in Greek is ekklesia. And the reason that is so important, remember where Jesus is? He is standing on the steps of the Capitol, surrounded by all the administration and all the icons and everything else. And he says, upon the foundation of what you just realized and said, Peter, I'm going to build an ekklesia. And that is not a religious word. It would be the equivalent to a political party. I'm going to build a political movement. And it's going to go beyond politics. It's going to go way beyond governance. It's going to go way beyond all of that. But for you to understand what I'm doing when I pull you guys together, I am not here to build a temple. I'm not here to build a religion. I'm not here to build something that stays contained in an hour and a half, 1 day a week of your life, maybe. I am here to involve you in a whole movement that will contend with all other movements. That will be subversive and overthrow all other movements. It's not the house of God. The best that we can really relate to is He has a platform. He has an agenda. And I am calling you together and building it. And it's going to start with, well, who are you and who are you to tell us what you're the Son of the living God. So therefore, you're the only candidate that we should ever consider. And I'm going to build a movement. And he says the gates of Hades, because Caesarea Philippi, it used to be called Banus, and right now it's actually been renamed back to Banus if you go there to this day, the old ancient city, because it was named after Pan, Banus, in Greek god. And there was a cave there, and he guarded the afterlife and who could go into the afterlife and sometimes who could come back, including the gods and the spirits and all of that. And so at the mouth of that cave is where a lot of this administration and all these temples were built. You can go there to this day and see it. And it was called the gates of Hades. Now we sit there and go, the gates of hell, and suddenly we think about heaven and hell and judgment. But this is what he said. He said, no. The guardians of death. The ones who inflict death, the ones who say you can't come back from the dead. Listen, I'm going to build a movement, and death won't end it and won't stop it. Because here's the thing, like whenever you look at the Roman change of government, throughout history, it wasn't done mostly through elections, very few. It was done through assassinations. The way that the Caesars got changed, somebody killed the one before them. The way you would see that among all the empires, among all the leaders, it was either like the leader died and then somebody kind of inherited the throne, or they got killed and somebody took the throne. And that's how you stopped one administration and started another. And that's how you brought about political change. And here's what he says. I'm going to build a political movement that my death, it won't end it, it will fuel it. Oh, and here's the thing, Peter, your death won't end it. It'll fuel it. And John, your death, and Matthew, your death, Simon, your death, even Judas, your death, it's only going to fuel it. Oh, and here's the thing, guys. I will give you the keys to the kingdom of heaven, which is the model for all of these Jewish groups, right, on what we're aspiring to. A better society, a better way, better justice. Well, what are you referring that to? Something that only God has in mind. Yeah, I'm going to give you the keys to that. And whatever you bind on earth will be bound in heaven. And whatever you loose on earth will be loosed in heaven. And then get this, most confusing verse for some of us. Then he ordered his disciples not to tell anyone he was the Messiah. Why? Because people would do then just like we do now, and they would take the campaign in a different direction. Because suddenly it would be about how do we get him in the seat of power? How do we get him positioned into office? And he's like, my movement doesn't work that way. You see, my movement works in your heart. And we will overthrow the Roman Empire not because we unseat Caesar and you enthrone me. We'll overthrow the Roman Empire when you follow me. When you live like me. When you love like me. Oh, by the way, if you want to know how I love, here's how I love. I got one from that group, and I got one from that group, and I got one from that group, and I got one from that group. And y'all don't even like each other. And y'all are part of my group. That's how we're doing this. You see, Jesus offers a better way to be politically engaged by pursuing people rather than positions of power. Now, I am thankful for every Christian man and woman who throws their hat in the ring and deals with the junk they got to deal with and the attacks to be a part of our political system and sit in those seats of power. And I hope and pray that God appoints and raises up more people to do that. But let me just tell you, his way was not to chase after the position of power. It was to chase after people. You see, the great commission that he gave to his followers says to go out and make disciples of all nations and baptizing them, immersing them into the claims and the teachings of Jesus, but also bringing them ceremonially into fellowship and relationship and family, right? And then teaching them everything I've taught you. Here's what the Great Commission is. Pursue people. Don't rule people. Now, the question I would ask, are you more aligned with a political party that is seeking a power position than you are with Jesus who's pursuing people? Because what I'm troubled by when it comes to election time is pastors and churches and Christians who put their politics out there knowing it will drive people away. Because you got to get your man in office. You got to get your gal in office. Knowing that those people on the other side of that issue are being moved farther away. You see, that's where Jesus would go. Because all those groups had the inroad to what God wanted. And Jesus didn't hang with those groups. He went out to the people. Now you sit there and go, no, I'm all about Jesus and I'm all about his agenda. Well, what would your conversation and conduct around politics and political issues say? I mean, would other people know that? Because I can drive down the street and know who people are voting for, but I don't necessarily know what space Jesus takes up in their heart. You see, just imagine, if you will, a world. Because even if you're not a follower of Jesus, even if you don't believe he's the Son of God, even if you don't believe that he was anything more than just a man, even those who believe he was just a man believe he was an incredible man. And even those who think he was just a teacher think he was an awesome teacher. And even those who just think he's a good example think he's the best example. Just imagine a world where just the Christians had their primary allegiance to being like Jesus and taking on his agenda of pursuing people instead of positions of power. If just the Christians did that, what would the world be like? Now, next week and week after, we're going to dive deeper into Jesus' platform and how it subverts political parties and religious groups then and now. But let me go back to the statement. This may be the most important election of your lifetime. This, seriously, may be. So what I'm asking you to do is switch parties. Switch parties. Just come into the Jesus party, right? Just make his party your allegiance. His ways, his teaching, his claims. When it comes to all the others, you may have to choose, but the truth is, none of the above. I've already chosen. Now, you may have to go into a ballot box somewhere and you have to make a choice because we're going to have to live with it and it's going to be affected. But the truth is, when you go into that ballot box, when you do whatever, you just go in there and says, okay, they're asking me, who do I put my hope and my trust in to steer this country in the right direction? The answer is none of the above. Jesus. He's not on the ballot. But my hope and my trust to fix the economy, to be our national security, it's a race to the bottom, and I'm picking the lesser of evils. But when it comes to my hope and my trust and who I align myself with, on this ballot, none of the above. It's Jesus. And on my way to this ballot box, and when I walk out of here, I'm taking his agenda to pursue people. Not the positions of power. I'm not trying to get my representative in the... I just want him to be in the position of power in all of our lives. I want him to be the influence in all of our lives. So I'm switching parties. And that's what Jesus did. I am building, he used a word, ecclesia, that we've spiritualized, but it was very much a political term. I'm switching parties to the only one who truly prioritizes people. All people. I'm switching to the only one who eases fears instead of trying to exploit them and leverage them. Right? I'm switching to the only one who can unify us regardless of our differences. Regardless of our differences politically, racially, ethnically, economically. He can unify us. Why? Because he unifies us by teaching us how to love one another unconditionally. Switching parties to the only one who makes the world a better place, not by a new policy, but he makes the world better by making people better. Let me pray for you. Heavenly Father, help us to campaign for you and to represent you. Lord, we live in this world. We have to engage in this world. You told your followers to submit to those authorities and to deal with the systems of governance that are around us. But Lord, you offered a better way to politically engage. You didn't ask them to sit on the sidelines. You activated them and motivated them. And Heavenly Father, you gave them an agenda and a platform and a direction. God, we have gotten distracted with the best intentions. Many of us with the intentions of representing you and enacting your laws and your ways. But God, we've done it in such a way that it has alienated people. And that's the whole point. It's the whole point of why you sent your son. It's the whole point of why he died. So forgive us for missing the point in our zeal to get some kind of power. And God, would you ease our fears that if this election doesn't go the way that we think, it is not the end of the world. It's just maybe a darker world that you can shine more brightly. But it's just greater opportunity for you. Either way, help us to realize you win. And because of that, those who are with you win. It's in the name of your son, Jesus, we pray.